Hello JBS viewers, I'm Charles Usher Small, the director of ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, and we're here on the ISGAP Hour Fighting Antisemitism. I'm here with a distinguished guest, a woman who's really fighting for the Israeli people, the Jewish people, and women in Israel and around the world. Yifat Bitton is here. She's a professor of law, a full professor with tenure, and the director of a college in Israel. And really after the horrific events, the pogrom of October the 7th, Yifat emerged really as a champion of the rights of Israelis and Israeli women in particular, who were violated with horrific violence during the barbaric attack by Hamas on Israeli citizens, and many were women. So Yifat, really thank you for being here in Oxford with us for the Summer Institute. And could you please tell the JBS viewers, the work that you were engaged in since in the aftermath of October the 7th?
Yeah. Thank you very much for this introduction, for this generous introduction. I have to say that, Charles, it was not easy at all to wake up not just to the atrocities of October 7th, and in my case, with very close relatives, two brothers-in-law who got killed on that horrible day, fighting for the basic values, moral values that the whole humanity should stand for people not being viciously attacked in their homes. But even within that horrible news that I got personally and that the whole nation was surrounded with, it was very clear to us from the beginning that something that we wouldn't believe would happen has happened here. It was something that you could see right from the outset to look at the pictures and the footage from October 7th, to see the massive amount of young women being dragged, murdered, surrounded by vicious terrorists, armed from head to toe, and them being there, completely vulnerable. And as we know, and as I know from my work as a feminist for over two decades, as a legal activist, as a universal feminist, the way I look at myself and the way I represented the interests of women globally, the thought immediately went to the fact that even under less vicious circumstance, we would expect that women will be taken advantage of in such vulnerability and would be sexually abused, and under these circumstances where we know that there's no mercy whatsoever to anyone, and that there's the extra value embedded in terrorism of terrorizing people, not just by torturing them, but rather by hurting the very basic, the core of what they perceive as safety. And many times it also pertains to women's safety. We could imagine that the unimaginable has happened. So what we did was very, quickly after we were able to somehow pick up our heads from the horrors that we saw and witnessed, and a group of women that are experts in the field, and I've been, as I said, researching the field of sexual violence against women for over 2 decades, both as a legal scholar, as a professor. I'm a president of an academic college, but prior to that, I was a law professor at a law faculty, and I was combining both the research, the theoretical more type of research, but also taking it to the court, trying to make the change realized for women by establishing an NGO, a legal NGO. I did all that.
What's the name of the NGO?
So the NGO's name is Tmura, which is in Hebrew, it's the word for both change and exchange. So what we thought was that if we take it to the court, to the cases of sexual violence, and we'll get the perpetrators and the enablers to pay with their money to the victims who needed that in order to get their lives back on track somehow. This would change things, and indeed I was really content with the change that we were able to make. But still, these 2 decades did not prepare me to what we've witnessed after October 7th aftermath, when not only watching the pictures and the videos, but rather being approached by all kind of people who were there, who heard something, who saw something that was suspicious to them. And my thought was that this is not something that we should wait for others to explore for us, but rather the whole state of Israel is in a state of shock. It needs to be shaken and awakened to this, to try and see what we can do in terms, from a legal perspective, to see if there's a way for us to retrieve the evidence from the battlefield. But this is unprecedented, that under such a one-timer raid terrorist attack, you would be able to treat a crime scene as if this is a regular, rape crime scene, which is, as it is very hard to retrieve evidence from. And here it was simply impossible.
Right. So in our Summer Institute here in Oxford, at the ISGAP Summer Institute, we had many experts on radical political Islam, and we know that Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other radical Islamist jihadists operating in Gaza and the region want to destroy Israel and murder Jews. When in their warped view of the laws of war, they are, from their perspective, entitled to murder. It's an obligation to rape. They're able to raid and take material and
take children, mothers,
values, yes,
murder them.
And they can murder them, and also they can own them in their twisted ideology. And we understand that, we study that. But the thing that shocked me, and I want to ask you about, is the silence, the deafening, loud silence of international organizations, of women organizations, of the United Nations. At the beginning, they were silent to what happened to the brutality of Jewish and Israeli women and citizens. How did you react to that? How, as a feminist operating in this space, as you said, you're operating in Israeli society, but you see yourself as a universal activist on these issues. Were you shocked by this silence? How did you react to the silence?
Yes, I have to say I was shocked by the silence. Because indeed, my work has been globally relevant and prevalent, and I'm part of the feminist community throughout the world. I have to say that there are certain feminists who stood by us from the first moment, and it's important to note that we were not completely alone, but definitely the organizations, mainly in the UN, that were entrusted with a mandate to do exactly that, were failing us over and over again, and it took a long time before the first mission arrived to Israel, even though I commend the advocate Pramila Pattern for coming against the...
She works in the United Nations?
Yes.
Who is she? What's her position?
So she's the rapporteur for conflict-based sexual violence in conflict areas, and she has expertise in the field of sexual violence in conflict areas. But with us it was very different, because we are not in a situation where our state has been taken away from us. We're struggling to take it back, and it becomes a no man's land of the type that she's been visiting, even in Ukraine. But rather we have a hold on our territories, definitely in the south and the Negev, where this has happened. So there was a need for modification here. And what I thought was that, instead of getting being consumed with the sorrow of not just the victim's voice that has been silenced, but also with the silence of these organizations, feminist and human rights organizations by the UN, I decided first and foremost to just go there and put it in their face and say, this has happened.
So
this
you traveled to New York?
So I traveled to New York. I was invited by the Israeli mission to come and speak as an expert in the field. It was in the beginning of December, and something started moving a bit, and I think that was part of what eventually brought Ms. Patton to Israel. And later on, my sense was that the report that she wrote was important, but it was very initial. What we needed to do was, in my view, what I always do as a legal scholar. I go to where I'm good at, to the professional scientific tools that we have, or we can, somehow reshape, creatively reapply, and so on and so forth, to make some, an order in this horrific chaos. Because the chaos was caused by Hamas, by the terrorist organization. The fact that the CSI units, crime scene units, were unable to detect the evidence and everything, it's because they were busy identifying hundreds of people who were murdered that day. So how can you come and blame the victims? But you know what? If you already do that, no problem, I'll answer to that. And that's my mode of thinking and operating. That's the way we should work, I think. Instead of being consumed with the sorrow of the effects of anti-Semitism, whenever we can rebut it and fight it, combat it with knowledge, with science, this is what we should do. And this is why I find this seminar to be so effective and important.
It's incredible. So in October, about 10 days after the pogrom of October the 7th, I went to Columbia University. There was a teach-in in the School of Social Work around the 23rd of October. And there were professors of gender studies, feminists. The professors, they're doctoral students, scholars of social theory and philosophy. And Columbia is one of the best universities in the United States,
Absolutely.
if not the world. These are people who have mastered the literature. And they were articulating views that I'll never forget. They were saying that resistance by all means is justified to end the occupation, including violence. And when they were asked, innocent kids listening to music were murdered and tortured and raped and horrifically. They said that once the resistance will end, the violence, the sexual abuse, these are professors of gender studies, then the sexual violence will end. So when Israel is destroyed, it will end. Until then, the resistance, violence is morally required. And they went on to say, not only for Israelis, but anybody who helps the Zionist entity, who contributes to the occupation, also need to be resisted. So they were calling for violence against Jewish faculty, students, and staff, their colleagues at Columbia University in New York. And they were doing it, these were not thugs on the street. This was not Hamas. These were people who have mastered philosophy and social theory. These were major professors at Columbia. So the genocidal anti-Semitism that happened on Israeli soil to Israeli innocent civilians, women and kids listening to music, is justified, and this discourse starts at Columbia, at the Ivy League universities, in the Sorbonne, in the Oxbridges of the world, and we've been learning this for 40 years. And New Yorkers, Jewish New Yorkers, are shocked at the explosion of anti-Semitism when they know so well that their colleagues, their friends, their children are learning and studying with this insane, social theory. So we have the Red-Green Alliance, we have the radical Islamists who are operating in the kinetic field, and we have the extreme progressives that are actually supporting this. It's amazing. So when you, and I know you study gender studies and you're an intellectual and a scholar, so when you see this connection between the intellectuals and what's happening in Israel, in Gaza, now in Syria, what's your reaction to this, in this moment of this explosion of anti-Semitism?
I think that, I went to Harvard for a postdoc for a year, and I attended many of very similar classes. And I was still able to think critically of these critical theories. And that's the whole point to me. You should think of it critically. And of any professor you're being taught by, critically. And I would expect, and I then graduated from Yale, where we had much less of that. But we've seen that both Yale and Harvard, mainly Harvard, have been very deeply involved in these immoral interpretations of acts that are immoral by to the core, like, and even the thought of doing it against Israelis or Jewish people. I have to say that I didn't go to the place of this is just anti-Semitism, this is just horrible, because I'm trying to always think globally. It's true that there's a huge part of anti-Semitist ideology there, but then I think that we should not allow them to separate us from the moral compass of objective ideas of morality that we've been raised and taught by, and that the Jewish people holds very strongly to. And in that respect, I cannot imagine, of course, them saying something like this about attacks by, I don't know, that went in Kosovo, where there was a real, question of who deserves what land, and we have many of these in Africa, African country, such a conflicts going on. So I'm sure they wouldn't say it there. So one of the main strategies for me is to throw it back. Like, would you say it there? And that's where they start moving uncomfortably. Another thing is that, as a law professor, abiding both by the law and by the resolutions of the UN, we know that going back to this has been all the time, conquering the land, the colonization of the land. It's ridiculous. We have the decision of the UN, and what happened later on is just something that we can deal with, but definitely not go with backwards. I have to say that for many liberal, Democrat scholars, as myself, feminists, human rights advocates, it is not easy to be in this situation where we also feel that we wish that this war wouldn't have happened to begin with, and definitely think that this could be the time to consider finishing it, bringing back our hostages. We know that this might be a kind of, again, naive thinking, but we should definitely try it. And I believe that once the war will be ended, better life, regardless of the horrible casualties that both people in the region have suffered, is expected to us all.
So, it's a very important point, but you remind me of Emanuel Levinas, the great Jewish philosopher. And this is Jewish ethics from the Talmud, from Pirkei Avot, where he says that the moment we see our face in the face of the other, we're human. We need the other to be human. It's profound. We all come from the same source. We need the other. So if I'm a sexist man, I eliminate 50% of the possibilities for me to be a human being. I cheat myself, I harm myself. It's profound. But he also goes on to say that any political ideology that does not see the other as human, that you have to resist and eliminate, that we have a moral obligation to eliminate. So this is a kind of a Jewish take on it. So Yifat, we're running out of time, but I would like for you to please remind JBS viewers the name of your organization, how they can access your materials and your research, which is really, really important.
Yeah, so we wrote a report, a very comprehensive one. It was presented in the UN a few times, and this is an ongoing project. You can read the report on our website, www.yifat, sexualterror.com. I always say that the fact that this domain was available says a lot about whether something like that could have been expected, but we have now a new role as a people to make sure that something like this never happens again, and in the case that it happens to others, and this is a risk, the risk of copycatting and so on and so forth, which is very prevalent for terrorist organizations. This is not an Israeli case. This is not even an Israeli-Palestinian case. This is a worry for all states, for all women globally, and what we expect is for this report to be effective there as well. And as I said, my organization now is Achva Academic College. It's situated in the south of Israel. What we try to do is to do our best in bringing the healing that our communities need. And I have to say that many of my students are not just from Jews from the periphery of Israel, from the south, but also Bedouin students. And we're very proud in being able to show not just ourselves, but the world, the beautiful faces of Israel.
Very nice. A very profoundly important work, and really thank you for being here, Yifat. Thank you. Today, we're really fortunate to have a special colleague, guest, brother, who's been involved in ISGAP for many years, Professor Ansel Brown. Professor Brown is a professor of law at North Carolina Central University. He does a lot of interesting work on issues of racism and anti-Semitism, and some of his work has been looking at the connection between Pan-Africanism and Zionism. That's just one element of the amazing work Ansel has done in building bridges with the African American and Jewish American communities, and really, I guess, defending Jewish self-determination and our right to be in Israel and notions of Zionism. So for your viewers, Ansel, for our viewers rather, can you explain the connection? First of all, I guess, explain what is Pan-Africanism and where it originated from, and what is the connection to Zionism?
Yeah, absolutely, Charles. So Pan-Africanism is essentially a movement of Africans in Africa and around the world to have greater solidarity, greater connectivity, whether that's historically, culturally, politically, for the collective progress and uplift of Africans around the world. And the connection of Pan-Africanism to Zionism is that very much akin to what we saw with Zionism and the advent of modern Zionism in the 1800s, is that Africans in the diaspora, sort of in the post-slavery era, and probably even before that, began to realize that in the sort of context of their difficulties and adversities and injustices and the crimes that were committed against them, that they needed to be more connected to their ancient homeland, or probably even more recent than what we saw with even Zionism of Africa. And so many of the leaders in Pan-Africanism in the 1800s, they began to sort of rally solidarity and movements within the Black community to be more connected to one another. And so it's very similar to what we saw with Zionism, where the Jewish people began to realize that, hey, we're only going to be safe and secure and thriving with full self-determination by being connected to our homeland of Israel.
And for our viewers, who are some of the key thinkers or originators of Pan-Africanism?
Yeah, so you had the likes of Edward Blyden, you had W.E.B. Du Bois. Those are some of the forefront, sort of the leaders who are at the forefront. You have Marcus Garvey. And all of those leaders, by the way, draw a strong correlation and connection between Pan-Africanism, the Black connection to Africa, and the Jewish connection to Israel with Zionism.
And what's also interesting, I was at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center in Accra in Ghana, which was interesting. Du Bois was an eminent scholar. He was at Harvard and studied in Berlin. While he was in Berlin, people actually mistaken him for being Jewish, which is one sort of element. What was Du Bois' perception of Zionism? And,
yeah, well, interestingly, a lot of people don't know this about Du Bois. I mean, Du Bois was, he was a true legend and icon in so many ways. As a civil rights leader, as a Pan-Africanist, as an intellectual, as a scholar, as an educator. But one of the things that people oftentimes don't know about Du Bois is that Du Bois on record said that what Africa is to blacks is what Zionism must be to the Jewish people.
Right.
So he saw that strong connection between the two. As I mentioned, many of the early Pan-Africanists did see this strong connection and this correlation between the two movements.
Right. And so, Ansel, for our viewers, many of our viewers are very worried about the explosion of anti-Semitism after October the 7th around the world, and certainly in the United States. Many viewers will see people like Kanye West and Louis Farrakhan and other eminent celebrities from the African American community really exhibiting anti-Semitic, rhetoric, debasing Israel and that sort of thing, and it's very disturbing. And I would like you to explain to the viewers that there's another side to the African American community, maybe actually a larger side to the black community, who don't ascribe to those type of views, but feel, I think, a kinship to the Jewish people and to Israel. Can you kind of explain to the viewers who that group is, or that demographic of the African American community?
Yeah, absolutely, Charles. And I think it's important to highlight that a few do not speak for the whole. And I'll say that there has been a troubling effort by some to drive a wedge of division between the African American community and the Jewish American community specifically. But there is a broad range of African Americans, primarily those who are of the faith, the Christian faith tradition, the church faith tradition, who have a strong sense of solidarity with Israel. The black community always, in its history in America, has had a strong affinity with the Jewish community and the Jewish experience. Even going back to times of slavery, most of the Hebrew the black American spirituals drew inspiration from the Hebrew narrative, from the Jewish story. Go down Moses, Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. And then, of course, moving into the Civil Rights era, people the likes of Dr. King, they quoted deeply from the Jewish texts, the sacred Jewish scriptures. And here presently there are, again, a broad range of people of faith in the black community who have a strong sense of solidarity with Israel and with the Jewish community and the Jewish experience. And I think it's important that these voices are heard, because too often you have a few loud, sort of vocal voices who control the narrative. And the perception is that these figures speak for the entirety of the community. They certainly speak for certain groups, but certainly not all of black America. And I would say even the vast majority of black Americans.
What's your impression, I'm putting you on the spot, but this Mamdani has a good chance apparently to win the mayor election in New York City. And he speaks about defunding the police and doing all sorts of things that I think his anti-Semitism is very disturbing to the Jewish community, or many in the Jewish community, but also some of his policy proposals of defunding the police, advocating social policies that I think are quite different than traditional African American values. Somebody like Mamdani, do you have a sense what the African American population in New York sees him or perceives of him?
Yeah. Well, as a North Carolinian, I could tell you he most likely would not be elected the mayor of most North Carolina cities, and I certainly can't speak for New Yorkers and black Americans in New York. But one thing I want to point out is that the viewpoints that leaders such as this are taking oftentimes are views and agendas that are external to the good interest of the black community. And in major cities across America, I think there's an awakening within the black community that many of our interests and many of our issues are being co-opted by outside interests that are infiltrating and using the black community to try to give voice to an agenda that does not have our best interest at heart. And this is the sense that I get of what's probably maybe unfolding in New York. Hopefully it won't, but this is the sense that I get.
Right. I agree. So on that note, on that important note, I want to Ansel, I want to thank you very much, Professor Ansel Brown. Thanks for being here at the Summer Institute in Oxford, and thank for all the work that you do with ISGAP and well beyond on pursuing social justice and respect for all peoples, including the Jewish people and the Israeli people. Your work is really important. So
absolutely. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, JBS viewers, for tuning in.